Hello and welcome to Crafting a Revolution, the podcast. My name is Katie Freeman and I am your host. Every Wednesday and Friday, I am bringing you interviews with female and non-binary makers of all kinds from all over the world. Today's guest is Phoebe Kuo, who is a woodworker. Also, she's a self-described artist working in wood. Just some amazing pieces that she's doing. She's currently located in the Chicago area, though she is from California. And we talk a bit about that move and how that's affected her practice. But super excited to get to bring you this interview as always. So before we hop on in with Phoebe, I want to give a big shout out and thanks to the patrons over on Patreon. So thank you so much, Annette, 513 Woodworks, Katie, Women in Woodworking, Kevin, Lefty's Woodshop, Christy, Twisted Twine, Jeremy Speece, Sammy, Go Sammy Lee, Sven, Dwarf Size Workshop, Rachel, Moody Makes, Bonnie, Tool Mom Bonnie, toolmomstore.com, Laura Oakley Soap Company, Mary Lou, Made by Mary Lou, Brandy Studio, Obey, Lee, the Rainbow Carver, Ellen, Little Bear Furniture, and Ethan Carter Designs. Thank you all so very much for your continued and ongoing support. I appreciate you all so very much. And if you would like to get your name added to this list, you absolutely can. It's super easy. Just hit pause here in a second, head on over to patreon.com/crafting a revolution, and you can join the Revolution Pod Squad right over there. Bunch of different options, pretty much an option for any kind of range. So go check it out. Get your name added to the start of the list for every episode. All right, with no further ado, here is Phoebe Kuo. Phoebe, I always like to start by having my guests introduce themselves. So would you do that for me?
Sure. Hi, my name is Phoebe Kuo, pronounced Kuo like status quo, but with a K. And currently I am based in Evanston, Illinois. My partner is in grad school here. I'm from California, born and raised, and I do miss it, although I'm really liking the Chicago area. I am working, well, I'm a woodworker. I call myself a woodworker. I sometimes also say artist. So I'm an artist working in wood. And I have training in design, furniture, a little boat building. And I also had a prior life as a design ethnographer.
Okay. a lot to definitely dive into. And I was going to say, like, currently we're neighbors because I'm in Iowa. So,
cool.
Yeah, we're not that far apart. Chicago is about a 3.5 hour drive for me because I'm in Eastern Iowa. So, what part of California were you in?
Yeah, so most recently I lived for over a decade in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was in the area for undergrad, and then I lived in San Francisco proper for basically the first 10 years of my adult life.
Okay. I never, my wife and I lived in Oceanside, California for a little over, 4 years. And we never made it up to the Bay Area. She's been there before just on work travel, but I never made it up there. It's definitely on my bucket list of places to make it to.
Nice. Oceanside is SoCal?
Yep, it's northern San Diego County. So it's pretty much like right on the border of San Diego County and Orange County.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So where'd you grow up and what were you interested in as a kid?
Sure. Yeah. So I was born and raised and grew up in a small city called Santa Maria, like the Nina, the Pinta, and the Sans Maria. And it felt, and I think it felt like a small town.
Mm-hmm.
Had a very agricultural focus. There were a lot of fields. I grew up near strawberry fields. We had a strawberry festival. We had an annual rodeo. And a lot of people were driving around in big pickup trucks with, wearing Wranglers. So it was a beautiful place to grow up, also quite a conservative place, especially in the 80s and 90s when I was living there. So my parents immigrated from Taiwan to California in the 70s for graduate school, and they met in California. I have 2 sisters, so there's 3 girls, and I would say we definitely didn't fit in where we grew up, both from sort of an education level and from not being white level. So definitely growing up, I was always eager to see something else or go somewhere else, Yeah.
Did you, I want to ask 2 follow-up questions to that. So if you were in an agricultural area, were there a lot of migrant workers in the area as well, or was it like predominantly white?
Yeah, I think it was a split 50-50, white and Latinx. And it's flopped even more towards Latinx, I think, since I've left. And it has also shifted more blue, which has been really interesting to see. Now there's a Democratic mayor, and I'm like, what? It's great. I remember when I was an undergrad, which was in the mid 2000s, I realized I could look up political donations. And I looked up the donations to Prop 8, which was the gay marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember. And
oh yes,
82% had donated to the anti-gay side, and it really hit at home where I had grown up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other part I wanted to ask is when you said like educationally, you didn't feel like you kind of like fit into the area. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So at the time that my parents came to the U.S., there were quotas, basically. There were immigration quotas that I didn't become aware of until later. So I thought, of course, my parents are highly educated. They have doctorates. But it turns out that the U.S. only let certain kinds of people from Taiwan into the country. So that's part of the origin of the model minority myth. There are a lot of ways that has worked. But yes, my parents were highly educated. We landed in a place where I think the number of people with bachelor's degrees is in like the mid-teens.
Okay.
So it's not better or worse. We were just focusing on education was not the predominant culture there. So
right.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna make an assumption here that probably in your home there was a high focus on education.
I think so. I don't feel that I ever grew up in what people think of as like a tiger mom environment. My parents let us explore a lot of interests, but school was important. And I liked school and doing well in school. So yes.
I know, like, at least personally growing up. So, growing up in Iowa in the Midwest, there was definitely, even though I'm back here now, there was definitely a need or a feel of like, I need to get out of here. Especially because I knew from a very young age about my sexuality and knew how not accepted it was where I grew up. And so I focused so hard on education because I felt like that was like the way to get out. And I think to some degrees that kept me safe because it also, like, being so highly focused on it, I didn't necessarily have a social circle, and I think that was beneficial in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think for so many different types of people and different reasons, education is a way out, right? For my parents, education was their ticket to the United States. And for me, it was my ticket out of this weird cow town I grew up, which, I now feel, I now have nice feelings towards.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. So were you interested in like art or making, at all as a kid and as you went into like high school and stuff?
Yeah, I was. I think my parents always made sure we had, kid art supplies. We didn't have access to very high culture, and um, but there were always colored pencils, lots of scrap paper. My dad worked in a government office, and he would always come home and talk about how wasteful they were. But he would come home and bring reams of like copy paper where they had only
Mm-hmm.
the first page but thrown away more pages. So this is very like immigrant thrift, meant I had a lot of things to draw on. The interesting exception was that I had music lessons starting when I was 8 or 9, and that was kind of a view into a bigger world. So
Mm-hmm.
a cultured world, I guess, predominantly. Yeah, now that I think of it, there were a lot of very successful Asian musicians that I saw. So that was probably nice to see,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I think the world of classical music sort of clued me into, oh, there are exciting things happening out there in the world that you don't necessarily see represented in Santa Maria.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of opened up my world probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What instrument did you play?
I played violin.
Okay. I played viola from like fourth grade all the way through high school. Um, Not that I claim to be any good whatsoever. I was like the worst student when it came to music, but uh, it gave me a group of people that I felt like I could relate to more, for sure. So
That's
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
love the viola. I think it's a sexy, throaty instrument.
it is. And I had to chuckle when you talked about the copy paper being brought home because that's what my wife does. I mean, she works in like kind of government systems type stuff too. And so yes, she brings home like all of the like recycled like pages that people just like throw in the bin straight off the copier. And that's what our kids draw on as well. And it's plenty of paper in our house.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So what did you do post high school? Like where did your adventure take you?
Yeah, so um, when I was in high school, yeah, when I was in high school, I knew I wanted to go to college. I had one older sister who had gone before me, and she had moved out of state for college, and I wanted to too.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents and my school counselor actually convinced me not to go so far. I still wonder what would have happened if I had ended up in New York City, which is what I wanted. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually grateful they convinced me to stay in state. A lot of my friend group is still from my undergrad. So I went to school in the Bay Area and I studied design, which was really great for me because it was a combination of like engineering classes and art classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I satisfied my parents by getting a supposedly practical degree,
Mm-hmm.
but I struggled through making robots and like really barely passed physics. And I really enjoyed the art classes and the sort of human-centered design classes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess when you say design, there's a lot that could fall into that category. So was there a specific type of design you were working on?
Yeah, so my degree was called product design,
Mm-hmm.
and it was housed in the engineering department,
Mm-hmm.
but it was focused really on understanding the human needs going into designing any kind of product. So it could be a service or like a granola bar or a car. Right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So there was a bit of freedom there. A lot of my classmates turned out to be, entrepreneurs that started their own businesses, making snowshoes or apps. But my favorite classes were the classes where they taught us how to use the shop. We had a
Mm-hmm.
pretty nice shop, metal shop, wood shop. And the way they talked about it to us was, oh, you need to know how things are made so you can tell your contractors in China how to make it. And I was maybe one of the few in my class that was like, nope, that's okay. I'm going to make it myself. Like, I want to make it.
Right.
So while my classmates were off having keggers on Fridays, I was in the TIG welding station, like practicing my stacks of dimes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. How'd that get into wood? Was that your first, like in that shop space? Did you have your first experience with wood?
I think I might have turned a bowl or something, but there was always a wait. You had to reserve time. So no, I didn't do a lot of woodworking at all in college. And if I reflect, I think my dad, when I was young, had access to a wood shop that was on the Air Force Base where he worked. And he, again, the immigrant thrift thing, he would just make things we needed around the house. He didn't have any formal training, but he was like mathematically inclined. So he built bookshelves, or he built me a bunk bed. And I think what I saw in wood from that early age was, wood lets you make something you need, but you don't have. So it was very much about self-reliance, sort of empowerment, and also like scrappiness and resourcefulness. I didn't think of wood at that time, or even know of wood as something that people made art with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it makes complete sense. I mean, I didn't have anybody like in my direct familial life, like currently making things when I was growing up. But in our house, we had several pieces that my great great grandfather had made, and had been passed down through generations. So it was like an idea that I knew of, like exactly that. Like wood is this material that you can make things for your home from. But I had no idea that it could be art too, or that there was any level of that to it. And I still have a few pieces of my great great grandfather's, and I know he was probably self-taught, and bless his heart, everything is like nailed to high heaven and screwed to high heaven. And a lot of it needs work, but still it's like they're still functional pieces, and they're over 60 years old. So that part of it too was always something that I hung on to. That's something, and now when I make things for my kids, it's like they understand that that's something they can have for their whole life, and pass down, so
Yeah.
that's pretty exciting. Hey makers. So today's podcast episode is sponsored in part by Alicia Van Osdal, who is the owner of Basil Blue Design Company. Alicia is a maker of all things, really. Her focus is on beautiful craftsmanship through woodworking, repurposing, refinishing, art, and sculpture. Her background includes 30 years of graphic design, logos, and branding. If you have an idea or concept and need a creative solution or graphic design, you can email Alicia directly at Alicia, and that is ALICIA at basilblue.com. Or you can visit her website at www.basilblue.com. And fun fact, Alicia actually designed the logo for Crafting a Revolution. So that is an example of the impeccable work you can expect if that is something you are in the market for. So be sure to look up Alicia again at her website, basilblue.com. All right, let's get back into the action.
Yeah, it's a very accessible medium in some ways.
Yeah. So I want to, like, in that product design degree course and stuff, how many women were in that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a funny thing. It was very, very gender. I would say it had a good gender balance.
Okay.
It might even have been more women because it had the design component in it.
Right. Versus the maybe more straight engineering path.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say definitely the physics classes and the ME classes, the ones that I mentioned earlier, probably skewed more male.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about like ethnicity mix?
Yeah. I mean, even at the time, my question was always like, why are there so many other Asian women in product design? I can only imagine that a lot of them were in the same boat as me of trying to find a legitimate path
Yeah.
into a creative field, but I can only speculate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is outside just maybe understanding like going to school in the Bay Area, probably, especially during the time you were there, had a much larger Asian population
I think
too.
that's true. Yeah, I think that at my school there was probably at least 20% Asian.
Yeah.
I think.
I feel like that. And I think it's probably still true that there's a higher level of Asian population, specifically in the Bay Area. Um,
Right.
like Southern California, not so much.
Oh, really?
Southern California, maybe LA. There's a decent, I would
Yeah,
say there's a
I was gonna
decent
say I think
Asian
LA
in
is a
LA,
huge Asian. Yeah,
but
and
like,
sorry.
no, that's right. I was gonna say like San Diego though is like very heavily Latinx.
Yes. Yeah. That,
Um,
that squares with what I
yeah.
heard. And I should clarify, we were talking about Asian American students.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I think there have been later waves of just Asian from China and Korea
Mm-hmm.
especially, which I've seen lately. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, I was speaking of Asian American as well.
Yeah, that clarification was for me. Yeah.
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 So, I mean, it sounds like you went from a not very representative area to at least a much better representative area, or some way to connect with um, more of who you are and how you present in the world.
Yeah. Although I think what's funny is when I was in high school in this small town, I had a predominantly Asian American friend group. We
Mm-hmm.
were really the United Nations. There was one Filipino gal, one Korean, one Japanese American, and me. And when I was at Stanford, I think I had a much more mixed friend group, and I actually didn't connect with the Asian American student groups because I had not grown up with those communities. So
Mm-hmm.
the students who had come from LA were they were just surrounded by boba shops and other Asian students.
Right.
They had this very particular culture that I had no in or
Mm-hmm.
interest in because of that. So although I had a lot of Asian American classmates, I don't know that I noticed them that much, which sounds awful now. But
I don't think it sounds awful. I mean, I think it's just, I mean, it's your experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, I went to, it was funny. I picked a degree too that like would be like seen as legitimate, career path type thing. But probably the most exciting thing to me was that like we had shop time and like especially I did undergrad in early 2000s, and so it's like at that point in time like I paid $15 a semester to have access to the shop, which is extremely cheap. And if I had any understanding at that time of like what all that equipment just cost for like upkeep.
Yeah.
But it
What
was
was
like wood shop and metal shop, and there was even a foundry. So it was like you got to do all kinds of cool stuff.
yeah, totally. And sometimes it's the first time you've been exposed. What was your degree in?
Manufacturing technology.
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah, so it's much more focused on like I took multiple classes and like I can run a CNC machine type thing. So there's that focus, and then there was like design focus. Really, it ends up making you be like an industrial engineer essentially.
Mhm.
So kind of a Jane of all trades. You understand how things are made, put together, and then you can go out and work with manufacturers. Um, so it's definitely, I wish I had known though about product design at that age. Like I think I would have felt much more comfortable in like that space.
You would have vibed with that.
I
Yeah.
would have, I would have, because I mean, the class that I took, I mean, I was the only woman,
Mm.
like at all, which is fine. I'm comfortable hanging with the guys, but it was what it was. And now, like, the places that it puts me, like, I love going into places that make things. Like, I still get excited by the smell of, like, the, lubricant of a CNC machine and stuff like that. I like seeing that stuff, but the actual culture of those places, I don't fit in, like, at all. And so now it's like, it's a constant, like, oh, yay, I get to go to another place that, like, I don't get to be anything that's me at all. And so that's like an understanding. I think product design would have allowed me to maybe go into businesses, at least in like a different role or a spot that I feel like I would have fit in a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have no doubt that you can hang with the dudes, but representation matters. I mean, I was there at a very strange inflection point, which was that industrial design was waning as sort of at least something people were doing in the United States, but UX, user interface design had not quite come in yet. And so people were like, what are we going to do with this degree? So in that sense, it was very freeing. But in the other sense, it was very hard to find an obvious path when I left college. I would go interview at industrial design or like I'd do an informational session with an industrial design company, and they'd be like, we don't hire people from your school. You guys don't know how to, make 10 renditions of a toaster. And I was like, you're right, we don't.
Yeah. So what was your path after college?
Yeah, it was, I think that I was very lucky because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my degree, even when I started, but especially when I finished. And for better or for worse, that's how I've kind of conducted my life, which is what do I really have energy to do right now? I don't worry so much about where that's going to lead me. So far, it's worked out, but we can talk about this later, but I'm sort of in that spot again now. But yeah, I came out, I didn't have a clear path. I started working with a design magazine that some grad students had started. And I decided to interview an old professor of mine. I have no networking savvy. I did not go in looking for a job. We were doing a theme and he had designed something that matched. So I was like, oh, let me interview my professor. And we had a nice little chat. And at the end, he said, what are you doing right now? I said, oh, just trying to figure out what to do next. And he offered me a contract position at his small company. It was not a sexy position. I was sitting in the back of a darkened office watching 40 hours of interview tape every week and tagging it with code words. And I did that for 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, they said, how would you like to be hired full-time, not to watch videos, but to do design interviews? And at that point, I had watched so many hours of design interviews, I kind of knew what to do.
Right.
And so I ended up doing that job for 7 years.
Okay. Wow. Now I feel like I need to pick your brain about like, how well do I do interviews? Like, how do we design this better?
I think you do wonderfully. It's all about building rapport, and I feel very comfortable with you.
Good. Excellent. What was that? I mean, was it an interesting job? Like, I feel like that would be an interesting job.
It was so interesting, Katie. Yeah, I feel very lucky. So we call it design ethnography or ethnographic research. A real anthropologist would be mad at us for calling it that because it's not as rigorous as what they do. But a client would hire us. They'd have a question like, why do people drive Jeeps? Or how do we sell more toilet paper? Big open-ended question. Yeah. And we would recruit people to just talk to about their lives. We'd talk about everything that was important to them. And from that, we'd extract
the answer. Yeah.
But so I got to meet a lot of people all over the country and eventually all over the world even. Talk about really like prosaic things like toilet paper and cars. But because it was sort of this ethnographic interview style, I would get to learn a lot about their culture too.
Yeah.
So it was really fun. I got to travel on a company dime. And of course, there were frustrating moments too. I was very frustrated not working with my hands.
Mm.
And that's how I started taking woodworking classes on the weekends.
Okay. I mean, how did you, I guess, narrow in on that? The frustration was because you weren't working with your hands specifically.
That's a very funny, that's a good question with a funny answer. So I have always liked making things. I have always been cutting paper or drawing or doing, I had a Lego set when I was little, and not with instructions, I would just build weird things. I remember there was one afternoon where we had decided we needed more desks at our office. And so they had ordered a new desk and some legs. Somebody brought in just a cordless drill and they were like, here, Phoebe, can you put these desks together? And I just felt so good holding that cord and drilling some holes. So yeah, it seems like such an inconsequential moment, but like the joy I felt, I was like, I need to pay attention to this. But aside from that, I was noticing that I was taking on a lot of like cooking projects at home. If I wasn't able to make something, even now when I'm not able to get to the shop, I start baking bread or cookies or like looking at cooking blogs. So it was coming out in these strange ways.
Yeah. What led, like, I can kind of see the connection probably, the making the desks. Is that what was like the idea of like, oh, I need to like look for woodworking classes?
Yeah. It was like, oh my God, I can make something happen physically in the world and not in a PowerPoint deck. I think what's important for me to remember, because now that I'm doing what I do, it seems very obvious. My path was always wood, but it wasn't. At that time, I was looking up shoemaking intensives, like with cobblers. I was looking up bike building courses, and I had a spreadsheet going. Boat building was not on my radar. I looked up wood programs. I was looking up CFC and North Bennett. I didn't understand the differences between them. And woodworking was something that happened to be available. I had an old classmate and she was taking weekend classes. I was intimidated to even email my interests because it appeared there was always a wait list. And she said, no, just come over. I'm making a table. Just come over and meet John, who was the instructor. So he was super welcoming. He was like, yeah, when can you start? So it was definitely in the vein of an experiment. I didn't have a lot of woodworking experience and I was intimidated. But yeah.
Were you intimidated specifically about the actual woodworking, or just like stepping into this kind of class environment around this?
Everything. I think I'm someone who, if I think I have an interest, I don't always trust it at first. It felt very much like the experience of coming out to myself. Of like, I think I might be, but how do I know unless I do it? But if I do it and I find out I'm not, I'll feel so dumb. So all of those things, I was worried about saying, hey, I'm interested in woodworking, and finding out I wasn't. Yeah.
I've never heard it explained that way, but it totally resonates with me in the same vein. having that same question about coming out to myself. I mean, I was a child, but it was definitely like, well, how do I know? But yeah,
when you hear stories about people who do know, they're like, I was 3 and I knew it in my bones, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm definitely not gay because I didn't, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it was very similar with woodworking. I was more like, yeah, exactly. I was like curious, and I guess I took a different path in the sense of like, I tried a few projects like on my own and really realized like what seems now so simple, like how to connect a leg to a table did not seem simple then. And I'm like, just bunches of glue and angle brackets and sure, and then was surprised when it like fell apart on me, but it's, it was one of those things too of like, maybe it was a little bit of like, I don't know if I'm competent enough. Like actually the design thing is what always kind of hung me up because I always teetered on the side of like that engineering side with my degree and struggled though with like, how do you design a widget and then actually know how that widget gets made. And so that terrified me a little bit. Not understanding that actually once you just get the muscle memory of working with your hands, like the how to in the design comes naturally because you've learned those individual steps.
Yeah, the hands have a knowledge that the mind doesn't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, Revolution Pod Squad. So, this week's episode is brought to you in part by me, your host, Katie Freeman. I am so excited to be getting so very, very close to releasing my first ever virtual class called Wood Stain Rockstar, where I teach you how to add bright, bold, beautiful colors to any of your woodworking projects with just simple things that you can find around your kitchen. So excited to bring that to you. I promise you, if you are a beginner or if you have been woodworking for years, there is something for you to learn from this class, and it is super affordable, just starts out at $27, so really accessible to anyone and everyone. If this sounds like something you would really like to do, I would love to get you on the wait list for that. Head on over to freemanfurnishings.com, go to the bottom of that homepage, and you will see a sign-up form to get added to wait lists for classes, and I will make sure that you get that link as soon as it is available, which is next week. Can't believe it's coming so soon. So it's definitely something you want to hop on right now. All right, let's head right back into the episode. So was this like a maker space or like just a...
I'm going to say thank goodness no. I mean, I love that makerspaces exist, but this was a specifically furniture oriented shop run by this wonderful man named John Sheridan, who has now retired to Portland, Oregon, but he taught woodworking classes, furniture design classes at one of the local art schools in San Francisco. Okay. And so it was his personal shop that he also taught out of in the weekends for non-enrolled art students. Yeah, so just people like me who wanted to learn woodworking, he would sort of take us under, and it was very flexible. You kind of signed up for a time, and then there was free studio time, and it was really wonderful. There's not a lot of setups like that, I think. So I was really lucky. Yeah.
Was it kind of then? It sounds was it a little bit like apprentice style type of teaching?
I mean, we were all free to make our own stuff.
Okay.
So we weren't working for him. It was very much more like a office hours situation. He would run you through a couple of projects, like make a toolbox, make a stool. And then you would come in with your own design, and he would help you problem solve it, and you would just make whatever you wanted.
Okay.
Yeah.
You came from product design, but were you ever intimidated by that, like staring at the blank page and what the heck do I design?
I think actually that has maybe become more the case as we've gone further in the field. I could also be having sort of like selective memory, but I think at the time there were so many things I wanted to make. It was more of like, how do I choose which one to start with? So I remember the first thing I made was a skateboard. Like an old-fashioned 70s single plank deck with a kick. What do you call it? Yeah.
You're asking the wrong person. I know nothing about skateboarding, so.
Okay. Yeah. Either. So I made a skateboard with his help, and I did a cool little inlay on the top, and then I made a bed, And, I had just cruised around and found a bookshelf bed design that I liked, and I made that. So no, I think I felt pretty confident about figuring out the dimensions and things like that. I just needed help with the woodworking parts. I remember I made a lot of bad decisions, and, I once glued up a panel, and I had 2 panels that were, end grain to end grain joints. And, John was like, "Do you think you want a biscuit for that?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Okay." And I think back on that all the time because I still have the sideboard in my house, and I'm like, yeah, there should be a biscuit joint in there.
Yeah, the things it's like you don't know until you know, right? But
yeah, and I really like that he gave me the freedom to make that mistake.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, okay, I definitely get the list of like things you want to make, but what about, I guess, figuring out your design style?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is, my feeling is that design possibilities multiply with the technique you have. So at that time, I was like, everything's a rectangle and you just dowel it together in the corners.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, what can I make that's a rectangle? And when I felt like, well, there must be more than rectangles, somebody suggested I go to boat building school. I thought that was really weird because I had no interest or experience with sailing or with boats. Then I found out that there's a lot of people who are boat builders who become furniture makers and vice versa. And sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, so I went to boat building school for 3 months. I sort of just took an unpaid leave from work, and with the security knowing I could come back, I did 3 months and I built a boat in Maine at the apprentice shop, which is a really, really wonderful school. And I think when I came back from that, I had seen all these shapes. I had picked up more skills, and I had picked up this sort of way of working that was very different. It was more improvisational, really resourceful. And at that point, I started feeling a bit stuck or limited with my imagination, or maybe I should say I didn't know how to make design decisions. I didn't know how to feel, okay, I'm making this because XYZ reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's when the design frustration really started, I think.
Mm-hmm. I so totally get that. I feel like when I started power carving, I knew I wanted to do the power carving, but I didn't know, I'm looking at a chunk of wood and it's like, I don't know what I want it to be. And so I think I looked to other artists for inspiration and I wouldn't say try to replicate because I never wanted to fully replicate, but to get something maybe similar in concept. And I struggled so hard. It took like really just like, okay, here's a hunk of wood and I am taking this tool and it is going to be something. And like but letting it be free, not being focused on it and being okay with, you know what? I hate this. It's going to the firewood pile. Like that process, I think is what is like a specific struggle I had to go through in order to get to a point of like where I'm at now. Though I feel like I'm on the verge of another, like to push myself further into getting more different types of shapes for different types of functional pieces. Like I'm on that edge, and it's like I haven't yet jumped because it's still too scary. But it's like I know I'm gonna have to in order to grow myself. I have to just again like that muscle memory of your hands can free us to create sometimes.
Yeah, I really think that frustration is a sign that you are at a learning ready moment, right? That you bumped up against a limit. And some people are happy to stay within that, right? You can really be enormously productive working within a set of constraints. But I mean, I think someone like you, or maybe someone like me, is constantly seeking to try something new or be challenged by something different,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just another orientation, I think.
Yeah. And I think to me, that's like when you said in your intro, like you say woodworker and sometimes artist. To me, that's where artist comes in, at least personally, like the wanting to push myself into different techniques or shapes or whatever. That's the artistry side. If I was focused solely on the woodworking side, like I would imagine I'd much more be fascinated with dialing in and perfecting like dovetail joinery or something that is, like you said, very constrained. There's a certain, upper lower limit type thing to it, but you're so focused on just honing that one skill, perfecting that one skill. Um, and that's just like, I don't fit that box. I
Yeah.
would I would stop woodworking if I had to do dovetails like all day. Like, I would just stop.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I mean, I do see that like a growth mindset could happen in any field.
True.
But it makes me think of this. It makes me think of something my boat building instructor had said, which was, as boat builders get more skill, well, he said, as furniture makers get more skill, they make more complex pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And as boat builders get more skill, they just make boats faster.
Hmm.
And it was sort of this feeling
Interesting.
of like boats feel more finite, right? You know
Mm-hmm.
how to make a boat. And so you don't necessarily innovate on the boat, but you get
Right.
really good at making them, right?
Yeah.
But with furniture, maybe it's more open-ended that you can really just keep going,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, I know you're in a different space, and so it sounds like not a lot of access to maybe shop space, but where is your making at right now?
Yeah, no, I'm actually the most productive that I've been, I think. So the pandemic really forced me to figure out how to work from home. But I would say this path has been a long time coming. After boat building school, before MFA, I went to the Krenov school and
Mm-hmm.
did their 9-month intensive program. And that's where I really got my technical woodworking chops. And that was the best wood shop I've ever worked in and may ever work in. Just because everything was fine-tuned to precisely the way everyone in the school works. You
Mm-hmm.
weren't sharing it with sculpture students who are wonderful but destroy the machines.
Right.
It wasn't a maker space where people are coming in and building really rough work,
Mm-hmm.
all the way to fine work. So, in MFA, I was in one of these all campus shops, and I said, I cannot expect these machines to do really fancy stuff like they did at the Krenov school. So I'm going to find a way of working that is mostly at my bench.
Mm.
And so, yeah, my work at Cranbrook really prepared me for working in an apartment shop. What I have now is a bandsaw, and not the most amazing one. It's great for what I need to do. It's a 10-inch Rikon, and I have my workbench, and I can produce everything I need to, yeah, here in my apartment, which has just been, I'm very grateful for. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you're still doing, I mean, your body of work now is coopering, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Which I'm gonna be completely honest, did not know was a thing until I found, like, until Laura Mays led me to you to let me down that rabbit hole, with some of the work she did. Is that, I mean, is that a practice you learned with the boat building with the angles? Really? I would have
Yeah.
imagined it would have been something that comes in handy with boat building.
Right. I mean, Coopers often worked on boats like 200 years ago because boats transported things in barrels, and barrels would break and they would need to be fixed. But no, I learned coopering, and I like to point out, like, there's traditional coopering. It's thousands of years old as a technique, and I don't do that. I don't know
Okay.
how to make a barrel. I really respect the craft, and there are people who train for years, to be able to do that. What I learned is an adaptation that Krenov, an adaptation that we learned at the Krenov school, which is just to cut a flat board into narrower pieces, bevel them on the edges, and glue them back together in a curve. I'm definitely not the only person who does it. The longer I do it, the more people send me links and like, oh, have you seen this person? I'm like, that's amazing. Yes, so I learned it at the Krenov school. I did it once there and didn't do it again until 4 years later in grad school.
What do you think it is about that craft specifically that like calls to you?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because you are drawn to it before you have words for it. And then people ask you questions where then you have to justify it. So for me, the initial draw and the enduring draw is just the magic of it, of taking something flat and turning it into a curve. I know you can do that with steam bending, or you can brute force saw a curve out of a big block of wood. But with steam bending, it gets panicky and rushed and hot, and there's steam everywhere, and you need equipment, and you have to wait, and then there's the short time frame. Like, as an anxious person, I don't need more of that in my life. I love steam bending. I love what people do with steam bending, and it's just not something I want to do on a regular basis. I think you need a big setup and often other people helping you. So yeah, and it also reminds me of the experience of building a boat, which again was a beautiful experience and really a lot of muscle work. I remember pushing on these 12-foot planks of pine and knowing that if I let go, it would smack me in the face, right? And being afraid it would crack, and just feeling like you're wrestling with the wood, that you're in the struggle with the wood, trying to get the wood to do something it doesn't want to do. And not to get too like woo-woo about it, but I don't want to fight with the wood. The way I learned to work with wood at the Krenov school, and the way that suits me, is sort of in collaboration or cooperation with the wood. So coopering is very calm. You take your time, you place your cuts, you assemble the curve. It takes several days. You can come back to it. And it also allows me to place my cuts in a very strategic way. So the way I like to work now is I look for a piece of wood. I go to the lumber yard. I walk up and down the aisles. I don't go in saying, I'm going to use Doug fir today. I'm going to use white oak. I kind of look for a piece of wood that's just really exciting to me, and I don't always know why. And sometimes I don't even know that piece is important until I get home. I'll get home and one piece will be like, hey, I'm really exciting, work with me. And then I'll design the work to that wood. If it's 6 feet tall, that's all the wood I get. I have to figure out how to get an interesting form out of that. Sometimes I start with a form, but I'm most comfortable starting with the wood, I would say. I think I lost track of the original question.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. Hey makers, today's episode is sponsored in part by toolmomstore.com. At toolmomstore.com, you can find any and all tool-based merchandise for all genders, all sizes. They've got mugs, they've got shirts, all kinds of cool stuff. I have one of the shirts myself that has the hashtag woodworker on it. And I also have a couple of the mugs that define what and who is a tool chick. So super excited with the merchandise that I have. I know that you will be satisfied as well. And also great discount for those of you who listen to the podcast. At checkout, if you enter the code MAKERMOM, you will get a 20% discount off any of the merchandise that you buy. So that's just toolmomstore.com. All right, let's head back into the action. I asked what draws you to it, and I think you totally answered all of that. And I also, again, that resonates. I don't. I do sketch just because I try to work on sketching like shapes, not necessarily like a fully designed piece, but I'll sketch out shapes. And I think that just keeps my mind open to shapes. And so it's one of those like I see a piece of wood and I go, that's what that's going like I just know that's what it's gonna be, right? It's not a design a piece first. It's I see the wood and then what it's going to be comes to me. Um, and then there's also pieces in my shop, pieces of wood where it's like it just hasn't told me yet what it wants to be, so it's just sitting there waiting for it. And that can be both exciting and frustrating at times as the wood pile continues to grow and there's nothing coming from it yet.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that's especially the case for sculpture or pieces in the round, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so particular to each individual piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I love looking for pieces that it's like, um, I've done a few pieces where it's like it comes from a piece of wood that's was totally attacked by ants. And I like love those pieces. Those
Yeah.
are like my favorite. So it's always weird pieces and it's always like someone's like, why are you buying like this half rotten piece of wood? And it's like, because there's so much good there. Like, once you stabilize it, it will be wonderful. So
Yeah, it's talking to you.
Yeah.
The weird ones always talk more.
Yes, exactly.
I just learned recently that Warden Esherick, he made furniture, but he also made sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sawyer in town, I think his name was Ed Roy, maybe. And he started setting aside the weirdest logs for Warden Esherick. So,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is really cool. Esherick had this whole network of people who were helping him in different ways, and he gets all the glory and the credit. But
Right.
it was a sawyer setting aside really awesome logs for him. Yeah.
Yeah, I have very similar relationships with a few of the local tree services in town. So it's like, especially because generally what they're cutting down is a tree that's like diseased or like lightning took it out or something, right? Like there's a reason it's coming down. But I've trained their eye to be like, Katie would want that piece, so it's like I'll come home and there's like a hunk of wood outside my garage and it's fantastic.
That is so awesome. Yeah. I mean, tornado season must be great for you. We just lost like hundreds of trees out here last weekend.
Yeah. Well, were you I don't know if it affected Illinois. Were you in Illinois last summer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had the derecho come through, which is like over an hour of sustained almost 200-mile-per-hour winds.
Oh my
And
God.
so yeah, like Cedar Rapids, which is about 30 miles away from here, lost 90% of their tree canopy. Like it looked like it still does, looks like a war zone when you drive through there because they've lost so many trees. But yeah, I am like up to my over my head in wood because it's like after that happened everyone's like, Katie, come take our stuff, because they just had so much to get rid of. But
Yeah, you're
they're
killing yourself, so there's 3 more of you.
exactly. But yeah, so when are you cutting all of the bevels on the bandsaw?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do. I cut the staves on the bandsaw, and then I hand plane the edges, and then I glue
Okay.
everything together.
Yeah. And so, I mean, all the joinery's it's just glue, right? Not,
Just long grain joints with
yeah.
pipe on too.
Yep. I mean, I have to imagine it's got to be meditative in a way.
There are parts that are meditative. The part where I get to zone out most is when I'm using my round bottom planes to smooth out the inside
Mm-hmm.
and take the facets off of that glue up.
Mm-hmm.
It can take a long time, you know. Quite a lot of the work is that final smoothing. And because I don't use any power tools, no grinding, no sanding,
Mm-hmm.
it's really just the finished surface is really just the planed surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
is. It is a bit meditative. And I think if I didn't enjoy that part, I would not be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I feel like when I look at your pieces, they're very liquid looking. Um, I mean,
Thanks.
is there is there a lot of like inspiration like from water or other sources like that that brings that shape to you?
That's funny you should ask. There's one body of work in particular, which is called the Swell series, and it was very directly inspired by swimming in the lake. I think I talk about that a little bit in the writing that goes with that work on my website. So that is definitely inspired by water and the experience of being in water. I don't think it's trying to depict water. I'm not
Right,
really a literal translations.
right.
I think a couple of other inspirations or references, I would say references really, are there was an artist named Valley Export, a feminist artist, performance sort of artist who was very active in sort of the 70s. And she had a body of work, not her most well-known one, called Body Configurations, where she kind of saw architecture as a symbol of the patriarchy, these hard, unyielding forms that we were forced to live with. And she just went around the city and draped her body over, you know, stairs, corners, sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also think about yarn bombers who go and sort of adorn in a very like, you know, form conforming way to trees,
Mm-hmm.
signposts and things. I wouldn't say that's where my work started, but as I started working the way I do, I find a lot of resonance with those
Mm-hmm.
artists. Yeah. So no, not always water, but I think gravity. I
Mm-hmm.
like thinking about what would this wood do if it allowed gravity to interact with it, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of draping pieces or
Mm-hmm.
pieces that sort of look like they're pinned in one spot and just allowed to fall. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, to me it's the true, I mean, I see like more of that waterfall effect, you know, with the gravity piece to that. Um yeah, super, I mean, super inspiring work. I really like seeing your pieces.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Um where you're at,
Uh-huh.
where do you see yourself pushing into going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, you know, in my creative life or creative projects, I really like constraints. I find constraints very generative. So coopering is a constraint that I've chosen for
Mm-hmm.
myself. Everything I make, it's like, what can I cooper or what can I do with coopering that's surprising or that I haven't seen before?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I have not exhausted that yet. There are so many more things I can cooper. And even within coopering, the way I work is very limited. You know, I don't do tapered staves, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Nothing gets narrower the way a true barrel would. And I don't vary in thickness. You know, I'm very much about this should look like it was flat and it just curved on its own accord. Um, and in terms of where I want to take it, I don't really see exploring those things. People have asked me, "Oh, have you tried tapering?" And like, one, maybe it feels a bit intimidating, but two, I don't feel like I need to branch out yet. I have so much
Yeah.
more to explore in this very specific, um, you know, room, conceptual
Mm-hmm.
room that I've set up for myself. So I think the work itself, I feel good about just keeping on, keeping on. I think in terms of evolution, I have more. a sense of anticipation or questions around what I'm going to do with my career, right? And I think it's a question that a lot of craftspeople have, which is, how do I make this sustainable? Because very rarely does the craft itself pay for it. Your life, right, doesn't pay the rent for most people. So it's a question of, do I try to get lucky enough to find a good teaching job? Do I create a product or item that I can sell on the side? Do I actually have an unrelated job, a bill paying, insurance getting job, so that I can sell this on the side and not have the pressure of it generating income? Marrying rich is already off the table. I married a wonderful person, but she doesn't have billions and billions of dollars. And I'm fine with that, but she's also in the same boat of having gone to MFA late and as a writer. And so, we're both looking at each other like, okay, what's next? So I am in this inflection point of, I have been doing the thing that I am interested in doing, and so privileged to have had that work out so far. But yeah, big questions. Where are we going to be next year? How are we going to be supporting ourselves? Right. So caught me at a moment where the anxieties are not around what am I going to make, but how am I going to make it, literally make it.
Yeah. I also get all of that. That's like an annual question, because it definitely is not working so far. But I get to meet other really cool people who are passionate about similar things. And right now I take that as the win, and, do a totally unrelated job in order to bring income in. So totally get it. Okay, so I'm looking at our time, and I want to say thank you for being here today, and also give you a chance to let people know how they can find your work.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, this has been really fun, and I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope there's some useful stuff in there for your podcast. I am online. I have a website. It's just www.phoebekuo.com. That's my name. And then I'm also on Instagram, which is linked through my webpage, or it's just at PFEBES. It's a really messed up spelling of Phoebe that a college roommate wrote on a takeout box once, and I've had it ever since. Yeah, or if you're ever around Evanston, Illinois, feel free to drop me a line and we can go for a swim in the lake.
There you go. Awesome. Okay, so again, that was Phoebe Kuo, and I will include the links on how you can follow along with her and find all of her amazing work in this week's show notes, which just look for that in the description on whatever podcast app you are listening to this on, or if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, check the description down below for those links to follow along with Phoebe. If you enjoyed this week's interview and any of the previous interviews, please make sure that you are subscribed on your podcast app, or if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and bell there as well, so you are alerted when there are new episodes, which again are every Wednesday and Friday. Please make sure to head over to Apple iTunes and leave a 5-star review. And most importantly, truly most importantly, please share with a friend or two or three that you're enjoying this podcast and that they really should check it out as well. I have a goal to hit 10,000 downloads per month by the end of the year. So that's a pretty big stretch goal, but I know we can do it, Pod Squad. I really know, I believe in you that we can do this. We're hitting about an average of 2,500 downloads a month right now. So I want to times that by 4. And in order to make that happen, I need you to share about the podcast. So Pod Squad, you have your marching orders. Let's make this happen. All right. When I'm not interviewing and making podcast episodes, you can find me designing and making furniture and other home decor at freemanfurnishings.com and at Freeman Furnishings pretty much across all the social media, most active on Instagram and TikTok, though, at Freeman Furnishings. So I do need to say one more thank you. I want to shout out again Wall Control and Hang Time. You can see their beautiful work behind me. So if you're listening to this, then I'm going to explain to you that I am in my podcast studio, which is still a work in progress, but I do have part of the walls done by Wall Control and Hang Time, allowing me to get this operational much, much sooner. And if you're watching on YouTube, then you can definitely see these wonderful pieces behind me. So thank you so much to them. All right, it's Friday. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And as always, let's go craft a revolution. She, her,